On March 15th, 1348, a merchant ship docked in the bustling port of Bristol, carrying more than just exotic goods and spices. Hidden among the cargo, an invisible killer had already begun its deadly work. Within months, this microscopic terror would reshape European civilization forever, claiming the lives of over 100 million people worldwide. But here's the thing that might shock you. Almost everything you think you know about the Black Death is completely wrong. For centuries, we've been fed a steady diet of myths, misconceptions, and medieval madness about one of history's most devastating pandemics. From nursery rhymes that supposedly tell the plague's story to wild theories about how it spread, popular culture has painted a picture of the Black Death that's more fiction than fact. But modern science has been busy, and what researchers have discovered will completely change how you understand this medieval catastrophe. In this video, I'm going to shatter the most persistent myths about the Black Death and reveal what actually happened during those dark years. We'll dive deep into the real science behind the plague, expose the medieval theories that led people astray for generations, and uncover how some cities actually managed to save thousands of lives, while others fell into chaos. By the end, you'll understand why everything from your elementary school textbooks to Hollywood movies got this story so spectacularly wrong. But before we demolish these myths one by one, let me give you some context about why this matters. In 2010 and 2011, scientists made a groundbreaking discovery that finally put centuries of debate to rest. Using cutting-edge DNA analysis techniques, they extracted genetic material from the tooth sockets of plague victims buried in mass graves across Europe. What they found was definitive proof that Yersinia pestis, a bacterium first discovered by scientist Alexandra Yersin in 1885, was indeed the culprit behind the Black Death. This wasn't just another theory or educated guess. This was hard scientific evidence that ended the debate once and for all. Here's what makes this discovery so remarkable. The plague DNA they recovered was almost identical to strains that hit Madagascar in 2013. That means we're dealing with a pathogen that has remained virtually unchanged for over 600 years, a microscopic time traveler that gives us unprecedented insight into medieval medicine and society. Now, you might be thinking this is just academic curiosity, but here's the twist that will blow your mind. The bubonic plague never actually went away. Between 1970 and 2020 alone, the Centers for Disease Control reported nearly 500 cases of bubonic plague in the United States. That's right, this medieval killer is still out there, still infecting people, and still being actively tracked by health authorities around the world. The first major myth we need to destroy is one that's been drilled into our heads since childhood. Picture this. You're a kid, probably holding hands in a circle, singing "Ring Around the Rosie." Your teacher might have told you this innocent nursery rhyme was actually about the plague, with "Ring Around the Rosie" referring to the rash, pocket full of posies, representing the flowers people carried to ward off disease, and "We all fall down," symbolizing death. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's complete nonsense. This connection between the nursery rhyme and the plague was first suggested in the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes in the early 1950s by Iona and Peter Opie. But here's the kicker. Even the Opies themselves were extremely skeptical about this theory. They felt the rhyme had been created centuries after the Black Death swept through Europe, and contemporary historians completely agree. Think about it logically for a moment. There are dozens of different versions of this rhyme floating around, many of them much happier than the supposedly plague-related version. Some versions have lines like, "The one who stoops last shall tell whom she loves best," or "All the girls in our town ring for little Josie." If this was really about a devastating pandemic that killed a third of Europe's population, why would there be so many cheerful variations? Folklorists are genuinely puzzled by how this myth gained such traction. There's absolutely no historical evidence connecting the rhyme to the plague, yet somehow this fabricated origin story became so embedded in popular culture that teachers still repeat it to students today. It's a perfect example of how modern misconceptions can become accepted as historical fact when they're repeated often enough. But the nursery rhyme myth is just the tip of the iceberg. The real story of how the Black Death spread is far more complex and surprising than anything our ancestors could have imagined. The second myth that needs to be completely obliterated is the idea that rats were the primary villains in this medieval horror story. For decades, scientists painted a vivid picture of plague-infected rats scurrying through medieval cities, their fleas jumping from rodent to rodent before making that fatal leap to human victims. It was a neat, tidy explanation that made perfect sense, except for one tiny problem. It's probably wrong. Recent research has turned this rat-centric theory on its head, and what scientists discovered is absolutely mind-blowing. Rats simply weren't as common in 14th century cities as we've been led to believe. Archaeologist Barney Sloane spent years digging through the medieval waterfront records of London, searching for evidence of mass rat die-offs that should have preceded human plague outbreaks. What did he find? Practically nothing. Here's where it gets really interesting. In 2018, researchers proposed a completely different transmission model that changes everything we thought we knew. Instead of rats being the main culprits, they suggested the disease spread directly from human to human through body lice and fleas. Think about it. Medieval people lived in close quarters, rarely bathed, and wore the same clothes for extended periods. Body lice would have been absolutely everywhere, creating perfect conditions for person-to-person transmission. This new understanding also explains something that had puzzled historians for centuries. Why the Black Death spread so incredibly fast. We're talking about a pandemic that moved at roughly 1 mile per day across Europe. That's absolutely lightning speed for the medieval world, far faster than any rat-based transmission could account for. Even more shocking, modern plague outbreaks in the 20th century, despite having trains, cars and planes, spread at only 8 miles per year. Medieval plague was literally moving faster than modern plague, which makes zero sense if slow-moving rats were the primary vector. But here's what might surprise you most. The Black Death wasn't just a poor person's disease. This is another myth that's been floating around for centuries, and it's time to put it to rest. While it's true that the poor died in greater numbers, that's simply because there were more poor people than rich people. The plague was an equal opportunity killer that didn't care about your social status, bank account, or political connections. Medieval records show that knights, ladies, wealthy merchants, entire monasteries, and friaries were decimated by the plague just like everyone else. The disease didn't check your credentials before infecting you. Rich or poor, young or old, the plague treated everyone with the same deadly efficiency. Now, let's talk about the medieval explanations for what was happening, because they're absolutely fascinating in their complete wrongness. Medieval physicians and scholars were working with the best knowledge they had, but that knowledge was built on foundations that were fundamentally flawed. The dominant theory was called miasma, and it was based on the idea that disease was caused by bad air. Drawing from ancient authorities like Hippocrates and Galen, medieval doctors believed that corrupted vapors and fumes rose into the atmosphere and literally rotted the air. When people breathed this putrefied air, it reached their heart and corrupted their body's natural balance, causing deadly fever. So, there you have it. The Black Death wasn't spread by swarms of rats. It wasn't commemorated in children's nursery rhymes, and medieval people weren't completely helpless against it. Modern science has systematically dismantled centuries of myths and revealed a pandemic far more complex than our ancestors could have imagined. The next time someone tells you they know the real story of the plague, remember that sometimes the most persistent myths are the hardest ones to kill.